of you. So,
okay, perfect. Well, I've got the red blinking light that we are officially recording. So I just want to welcome everyone to this advisory group meeting. We have had a lot of new information kind of come in, and we have a lot to update you on, and hopefully a lot of discussion to be had today. Our presentation is going to be a little bit shorter, just allowing time for questions and discussion around the information that's presented. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about construction implementation and the costs associated with that. So kind of, you know, the first question everybody wanted more information on is where are these costs lining up? What the express toll lane user would see in the way of signage and how they would operate their vehicle through that corridor. And then what the toll rates and costs are to use the express toll lane. So I think this meeting, though the presentation will be a little bit more brief, it really hits hard on a lot of the information that we've all been waiting to utilize and weigh in on, you know, what the best path forward is for this project. Go ahead, next slide. So just a few opening remarks this morning to kind of remind everyone of where this project is from a statewide IKE program view. So the Department of Transportation is currently in delivering the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program that we call IKE. And what we did last year in May was announce the first 40 projects into the development pipeline for that program. And US 69 is one of those projects. So what we are doing in this process is the US 69 project is in the development pipeline, and we're, you know, collecting information, doing environmental work, and that preliminary engineering for this corridor as a result of it being in the development pipeline. The next piece that we have to do at KDOT and hope to announce the summer of this year is the construction pipeline. And we're going to select those first projects that are going to be early on in the IKE program that we would want to move to construction. And that's the schedule that we've talked about with this group and kind of how US 69 fits into that. There are 4 ways of getting out of development and into construction. We talked a little bit at that in our very first meeting. And what the options are is providing a local contribution, downscoping your project, phasing the project, or just purely on scores. So think of a bridge that needs to be replaced. Maybe we would add capacity during that replacement. So those are some of the examples of how you get out of development and into construction. So as we look at this project and look at the ways to get it out of development and into construction, the express toll lane option is one way of providing that local contribution, but we aren't specific about what type of contribution needs to be provided or where the source is for that. And as we, you know, continued to look through development and we started to do that environmental analysis, as you guys saw in the last meeting, you know, the express option did come up in preference based on some of that review. So now we want to talk about the costs. So go ahead into next slide. So the express tolling option as a cost and phased approach, you see here that there are 4 phases. The first phase is that $300 million corridor. That piece has to be that long for there to be utility because of the express toll lanes. You don't want to build a 1 mile long segment or a 5 mile long segment of an express toll lane. That's just not enough to make that process work or to provide a benefit. Number 2 is the 167th Street interchange. That would be the next piece that could be built. The $70 million piece is the northbound 69 to westbound 435 flyover. That piece has independent utility and benefit. And then the 255 million segment is that expanding the lanes south of 151st Street down to 179th Street. So that total construction cost is $655 million for the entire corridor. Next slide. And then we look at the non-tolled option. And you guys will recall, because it wasn't that long ago that we talked about what a typical section looked like, how much additional pavement and additional capacity would have to be built with those connector distributor lanes. So we have that 6-lane main line versus, and then the additional 4 lanes of collector distributor for a total of 10. So there's some increased cost to this one. It's $740 million. The first piece there, and I won't walk through all of these, there's 9 different phases that could have independent value for the corridor. And so similar to projects that have been built on 435 and other pieces of US 69, you could take a piecemeal approach and get value for each individual piece. So if we don't move forward with the express toll lane option, the question becomes when and what pieces you would build of these improvements on US 69. Next slide, please. Oh, we lost the presentation. Cindy, do you have any questions about that while we're getting it back up?
Sorry, I don't know what happened. Something happened here at HNTV in the office. You'd think that we would have that down, but we all lost our connection. So.
Oh no. Okay.
So
yes,
Kelsey
so
should be coming back.
Julie has a question. So it looks like the piece by piece is a higher cost. Is that, let's see, piece by piece approach is more costly. Yes, that's correct.
And now that you brought them both up side by side.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
I mean, it's certainly, to me, that's certainly something that is a headline to me.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. And that's exactly what, when we think about these slides and how the information is presented, the express toll lane option is the better cost value for the state. It's the better buy. You're being able to manage the traffic that could come to this corridor. And we talked about all the growth in Johnson County and growth in population and jobs. And we can handle the same amount of traffic with a $655 million improvement rather than a $740 million improvement. So when you factor in additional maintenance costs, we're really close to $100 million difference between the two projects. And I think after this, let's see, but do we have to do all of the piece by piece parts? So Clint, I think the piece by piece, what we said was, what are the 2 different options to manage the traffic? Would you have to do all 9 phases or have to do all 4 phases? I think we wouldn't build them all right now of either project. But what we would want to think about is, if we were moving forward with the express toll lanes, we would need to build at least the 300 million to make that system work. And that is I guess the main point of looking at this. If we don't have a local contribution and we needed to address maybe a key safety issue, we might just move forward with the $70 million improvement as the first piece and then continue to deliver phases. And we may group some of those phases. We may do them each independently. I think we would have to rethink how we would approach the non-tolled option. I think we have one other question. What is the time frame for construction on each, and how long should each one last until something else has to be added? That's a great question. So both of these projects are conceived for the 2050 plan year. So when we look at what traffic growth is going to look like, what population, these projects were built to meet the needs of our projections in 2050. So that's sort of the planning timeframe. As far as the construction, if we were able to move forward with the express toll lane option, that's the schedule we've been talking about, where that could get to a design build team and construction could happen the soonest, with a mid next year, 2022, timeframe to have a team on board and working toward that. If we don't have the express toll lane option and we have a sizable local contribution from another source other than tolls, I think we could still meet that timeline. If we don't have a local contribution and we move forward with the non-tolled option for US 69, I think that's where we start looking at, you know, how we could bite-size piece and get this project into construction with a phased approach that could fit into the program, the overall statewide IKE transportation program. Okay, next slide. This is one point, I think a couple of you were asking questions kind of along this line. So as you can imagine, the express toll lanes, if we had 4 different phases, and maybe, you know, with some additional federal funding, we could even include a couple or at least one of those phases earlier with the $300 million project. But you're looking at disruption to traffic that's much more significant if you have to do little bites at a time in those 9 phases versus the $300 million phase. If you can expand that to capture some of the other improvements, but you're cutting down the impact to traffic if you can do larger projects. Next slide. Oh, all right.
All right, our first Mentee here. Based on the estimates of the project cost and phasing options, what best describes your reaction? A, the express toll lane option is the better value due to cost. B, the express toll lanes option is the better value due to less disruption to traffic. C, both A and B. Or D, traditional widening option is better because of increased flexibility. And then E, other. So feel free to tally in your responses, please. All right, it looks like we've got about 7 people who've responded so far, and it looks like, oh, good, a few more coming in. We got several around C. We've got one with D. Do we want to talk about that at all? Does
I don't think we need to, unless there's others from the group that want to, if there's other questions or things that the advisory group wants to talk about, or else we can move on ahead.
Okay.
All right, Robin,
all right.
Why don't we
Thanks
move
for
on
participating. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about kind of the second topic that Lindsay mentioned at the beginning. We'll talk a bit about the roadside messaging or the signing that would be out on both the general purpose lanes and the express lanes. This is a topic we've gotten, you know, some questions from you all. We had some questions during the public meeting, as well as some comments and questions that have come in through the website and social media. So our team has been working on developing what would this look like in conjunction with the express lane configurations that we've been testing. So we kind of want to walk through that today. If you look at if we think about the entire corridor all the way from 179th to 103rd Street, there are 3 toll segments along, 3 toll segments in each direction along that corridor, meaning there's 3 locations in each direction where you can either get into or out of the express lanes. We want to walk through a couple of examples about what that what that messaging looks like and how it guides the users as they make the choice as to whether to use the express lanes or not. Do you want to go to the next slide? So let's first start at the beginning of the express lanes when you first have the opportunity to get into the lanes. And for this example, we're going to use northbound US 69 just north of 151st Street. And this represents, if we think about that likely phase one project, that $300 million first phase, this would represent the first entry point that someone could choose to enter the express lane. So kind of starting at the bottom of the slide, shown in gray, there's 2 existing lanes on US 69 that head northbound. And when you get just over 151st Street, that express lane begins to open up to the left to the median. And that's what's shown there in orange there at the top of the slide. So 2 miles in advance of that, there will be a series of signs that communicate what is coming up ahead to the driver. And we're going to walk through those individually. Flip to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing the driver will encounter is signing in advance. Again, this is 2 miles in advance. That's giving them this advanced notification that they're approaching the express lane. And the fact that those are tolled is clearly marked along the top of the sign in the yellow bar there, so that it's people understand that they're approaching a tolled facility. And flip to the next slide. So the next information that's presented to the driver is what destinations are actually served by the express lane. And this is important because drivers need to know if they get into the lane, where can they go if they choose to enter the lane. And there are some destinations, I mean, we've talked about this in a couple of our previous meetings, that there are some destinations that are really closely spaced that can't be accessed from the express lane. So for example, in this particular example, you'll notice that 135th Street is not shown on the sign. And that's because 135th Street is only a couple of miles north of here, and there isn't another exit location for somebody to get into the express lane and then back out. So we need to make sure that it's clear that if 135th Street is your destination, you've got to stay in the general purpose lanes under this scenario. And flip to the next slide. Okay, so the next set of messages, again, we're progressing. This is, coming up on about 3/4 of a mile or so from the actual entrance to the express lane, is information with respect to pricing. So this is important. Obviously, the drivers need to understand not only where can I go, but if I choose to enter the express lane, what are the tolls that I'll be paying to reach a certain destination? So we've shown these in a couple of previous advisory group meetings, but those signs would be shown in advance and have the actual pricing at the time in real time for reaching those destinations. This just helps the drivers make that decision about, is using the express lane valuable to me in that particular case, based in real time, based on the nature of their trip at that time. And flip to the next slide. And then the last, the last message that's right before or right at the entry point, this is where drivers can move over to the left and actually enter the express lane, signed very similarly to really any other exit, other than the fact that it's designated as a toll facility. So this kind of shows you that series of messages that are shown. This is all intended for the general purpose lanes users that are making that determination as to whether they want to enter the express lane and make that decision. So that's kind of what that looks like to the drivers in the general purpose lane. But then the next several slides, we're going to talk about what does it look like if you're in the express lane and you want to move out of the express lane. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this shows a slightly different configuration. So what we were looking at previously was that first time that you have the ability to enter into the express lane. Now you can see this is a section where the express lane is already in place. That's the orange lane. The express lane is the orange lane on the left and the 2 general purpose lanes on the right. And this is approaching a location where traffic is allowed to both exit the express lane and enter the express lane. This is what we refer to as a weave zone, because people can move in both directions in those locations. This is that access zone or that weave zone. That distance is about 2,500 to 3,000 feet, or roughly a half mile of distance. So I know it's kind of shown with that short dotted stretch on there, but in reality, that's about a half a mile in length for people to be able to make that maneuver. In the last slides, we walked through those entry movements for the people that are in the general purpose lanes that want to move into the express lanes, and really approaching the weave zone. That messaging is very similar. So that's the signs that we've already kind of walked through that are showed kind of grayed out there. What I want to focus on here is the exit signing for the people that are in the express lane that might be trying to reach a destination. So flip to the next slide. So similarly to what we walked through for the general purpose lanes, you need to make sure that we're notifying people well in advance. Here's the exits that are available to me. Here are the destinations that are served by that next access point. In this case, we're showing about a mile in advance. We would show that both 119th Street and I-435 are accessible from this exit location. So if this is your destination, you need to prepare to exit the lanes and rejoin the general purpose lanes. And there would be another sign similar to that at the half mile point between here and the actual entrance to or the actual exit from the lane. So if you'll flip to the next slide. So at the beginning of the weave zone, this is the beginning of that exit location, that half mile length where you can exchange between the express lanes and the general purpose lanes. This again is signed very similar to how a traditional exit is signed. They can move out of the express lanes into the general purpose lanes and then on to their destination. So again, some similarities with the messaging and what's in a traditional roadway with some of the exit configurations, but also some unique signing on pricing and destinations that is unique to the express lane concept. The key with any of this is making sure that you have consistent messaging done well in advance so that people have time to make that decision on whether or not they want to use the express lanes. Does it serve their trip, and is it of value to them? So I want to maybe pause there. I know we just kind of ran through a bunch of signs and see if there's any questions on this before we move on to talking about toll rates and costs.
I guess I have a question, Cameron. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm your problem child today.
No, that's okay. That's good.
So I'm wrapping my brain around the fact that the express lane is in the far left lane, but a number of my exit choices would be to the right. So I would be, we discussed the last time about the differential in the rate of speed between the express lane, which we would anticipate, and the non-express lanes. And I'm sure there's examples all over the country of this working just fine, but that's where I'm wrapping my head around is I'm coming out of the express lane and I'm coming out hot and I want to cut across the two lanes of traffic to be in the lane I want to exit on. What does that look like? And is this configuration typical to like the Denver model, the other models you're looking at?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question. I think so. The short answer is it is very similar to how these are configured in other places around the country. The key to it, though, Julie, is if you kind of take a look at the schematic that's up there, that weave zone if your destination is 119th Street, you can't put that weave zone or that access location immediately south of 119th Street. You got to be able to do that in enough space for somebody to get out of the express lane and maneuver their way over to 119th Street. Now, so distance is one thing. The other issue is how slow is the traffic going in the general purpose lanes and how easy is that maneuver to make? I would tell you that one of the reasons why we are wanting to make sure that the overall speeds don't get to a significant differential where there's, say, 10-mile-an-hour speeds in the express or in the general purpose lanes and really high speed, is because we want to make sure that there's enough free-flowing movement in the general purpose lane so that those maneuvers are possible. We're not talking about gridlocking the general purpose lanes. They'll still be free flowing. So there, as long as there's adequate space in advance of that exit, there'll be gaps to be able to maneuver your way through those general purpose lanes.
And are those solid lines that we see in the drawing, are those, is there an actual barrier between that express lane and those general purpose lanes? And is the dotted lines the where there isn't a barrier, or is that all, how is that handled?
So the configuration that we've been talking about is not to actually have a hard physical, like a concrete barrier between the lanes. It would be separated by some additional width of about 4 feet or so to clearly designate it as you know, not part of the general purpose lane. So with some additional space, but not a hard barrier, it would just be striped with solid striping to delineate the lane.
So if I exit at a non-exit location and a non-dotted line, is that considered a traffic infraction, and can I be ticketed?
Yes, generally speaking, that is considered a traffic infraction. Yeah. So that's why you got to do that at the designated locations. Any other questions on this, or we can move on to toll rates?
Cameron, we do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh. But there should be a disabled vehicle lane to the left of the toll lane. So yes, so there would still be a full shoulder to the left between the inside edge of the express lane, and there would be a concrete median barrier between, say, the northbound lanes and the southbound lanes to keep them divided. So yeah, we would anticipate a full shoulder on that inside, allowing people to, like for disabled vehicles, to pull over and get out of the way.
We also had a question from John, and it is more to do with the westbound 435 flyover.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, how high will that flyover go, and could it possibly add more noise and exposure to the homeowners in the northwest portion of the area?
So maybe the best,
we had good right-of-way boundaries on where that would be.
So maybe the best way to think about what that would look like is if you're familiar with the flyover that's out there today that comes from southbound and goes eastbound. I'll say the complementary movement, the opposite movement, is what we were talking about here. It would be very similar elevation wise as where the new, or where the current flyover is that comes south to east. So it'd be about at that same elevation. In the location where you're talking about where it might come over and actually go on to westbound 435, if you think about the ramp that is there today that comes southbound to westbound, this flyover essentially comes up and meets the end of that existing bridge. So, you know, from the perspective of, does that add additional noise? Really, the improvements that already raised up to those elevations, those are already in place. So there would be some new traffic on those movements, but they've already been essentially built up to the elevations that they would be when that movement is added as well. All right. We want to move on.
Yeah. Would you mind, Cameron, if I did the first couple of these?
Yeah, go for it. Go for
it. Okay. So as we've talked about with the toll rates, we've talked about, and what our data shows is that the morning traffic is higher, obviously, during that peak than the midday, nighttime, weekend traffic. So you would expect that the rates will be higher in the morning to try and keep capacity at about, a third of traffic, give or take a little bit. The midday, nighttime, weekends, that rate's going to be lower, and that's going to be that time that we're talking about off peak. So when we don't have a rush hour, when there's not an increase in traffic. And then the afternoon traffic and the peak for the afternoon actually is a little bit heavier than even in the morning. So the toll rate would be just a little bit higher than what you'd see in the morning peak. And Cameron will explain that here in future slides. Go ahead to the next one. The reason I wanted to do these first couple is because I wanted to be reassuring that we are not setting rates to make money. That is not the point of having express toll lanes. We are using those as a congestion management tool to help reduce the congestion, to keep trip reliability in the whole corridor, but especially making sure that that express toll lane, if you're willing to pay for express service, you are getting that service. So these rates are used to make sure we are controlling the flow of traffic and improving everyone's trip on the corridor, whether you decide to pay a toll or not. And so Cameron will kind of walk us through how this in application looks in the actual toll rates and what the traffic in those lanes looks like. So back to you, Cameron.
All right. So, as Lindsay mentioned, we probably can't say it enough. The main purpose of the express lanes is to make sure that we are reducing congestion across all lanes and making sure that that trip reliability is ensured. And so what you have to consider, though, is what is the right pricing in order to make sure that that happens. And what happens if the pricing is not set to meet that level of traffic. And this graphic sort of shows how that can, what happens if that isn't set correctly. So if the pricing is set too high, higher than people are willing to pay, then no one's going to use the express lanes. And so you'll end up having empty express lanes where the general purpose lanes are filled up and not going to perform much better than the 2 lanes that are out there today. So that's what's shown on the top of this graphic in the gray, on the gray boxes there. On the flip side, if the pricing is set too low, like what's shown in blue, then too many users use the express lanes. And in this scenario, all the lanes fill up and perform equally. And this essentially performs no differently than if you just built another general purpose lane. So what we're looking at with setting the express lane pricing is what you see in green. We want to set that so that there is good usage of the express lanes, which removes traffic from the general purpose lanes, but the express lanes are not overused such that the speeds drop below where we want them to be. So this logic is why the speeds in the lanes have to be constantly monitored and why the pricing adjusts during different times of day based on the levels of traffic that you see out there. And in doing that, you can ensure you get the greatest congestion management benefit throughout all the lanes of the corridor. So I want to pause there, maybe see if there's any questions before we just talk rates here.
I think this is a really important slide to kind of verify that if you don't want to price it too high. If you price it too high and people don't use it, you're not receiving that benefit of the additional capacity. And Adam, I think you might have had a comment or a question. Apologize if I cut him off.
Okay, well, let's jump to the next slide.
Clint has a question on the chat. He says that implies that the cost might change several times during the day.
And that is the case, yes. So it'll be, the intent is to monitor it in real time. At a minimum, it would change probably, it would change based on the condition. So that could be as frequently as every 15 minutes during the really heavy periods of the day. There could be hours though, where there's long periods of the day where the traffic remains fairly constant, where the rates would stay relatively even. It really just depends on what are the characteristics that you're seeing at that particular time.
But I think it's important, and we've covered this in previous meetings, if you've entered the express lane and the toll rate changes from when you saw the sign or when you were in the lane, there is a buffer period that allows people to travel the length of the corridor with the price that they saw, so that you don't get a bill that's higher than what you thought it would be. I think Another thing, and maybe it might be a good question to address on this slide that we've gotten from others, is how this is different than the Kansas Turnpike. You know, it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison when you think about how the Turnpike's business model works compared to what we would be using tolls for in this corridor. You can still access this corridor without ever paying a toll. And with the Turnpike, they're using it for operation, maintenance, and additional construction on their facility. And Cameron, I don't know if you have additional pieces to add about the differences between this corridor and KTA.
No, I think that, you know, you said it is a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison. Just there's sort of two different purposes of applying the rates. And in this particular case, especially during the peak periods, the rates are more set based on supply and demand, where we have a fixed supply of one lane and the demand varies. And so the price varies based on the level of traffic that you see in the field at the time.
So Clint, I think we're going to transition to your question here on what the toll rates will vary by. We're going to get into that.
I see Clint's question. The short answer is it'd be by the nickel. We're trying to round those to the nickel. So yeah, flip to this slide. Okay, so we kind of talked about those operational goals and trying to make sure that those rates are set to maximize maximize how the entire corridor functions. And so what we're showing here are anticipated trip rates for certain trips between 151st Street and 130 or 103rd Street. And we selected this since these are the likely kind of extents of that first project. So as you can see, these rates have some ranges and they vary based on the time of the day, as we were just saying. So let's maybe take each one of these individually, starting in the morning. So in the morning, in that northbound direction, if someone drives the entire length of the corridor during that period of the day when the traffic is the heaviest, we would anticipate that trip to cost about $1.50. If they drive only a portion of the corridor, say they don't go all the way to 103rd Street, they only go to 119th Street, that partial length trip would only be 50 cents. If you look at the off-peak times though, so there's going to be large hours of the day where, you know, there isn't as high a volume out there. Then when traffic is lighter, whether that's midday or nighttime or weekends, the rates are much lower. Those same trips would drop to 30 cents for just a partial length trip, say that 151st to 119th Street trip, and 65 cents for the full length trip. And this makes sense. You know, there's less traffic, less need to use the pricing to distribute the traffic across all the available lanes. In the afternoon, as Lindsay mentioned, we are seeing a more pronounced peak in the afternoon rush hour. And traffic is definitely more congested in the southbound direction during the afternoon than it is, say, northbound in the morning. So the rates during that afternoon peak are slightly higher. So if someone's coming, say, from 103rd Street, drives all the way south to 151st Street, that would be a slightly higher trip at $1.75. And if they drive just a portion of the corridor, that partial length trip would cost about 75 cents. So, you know, we've walked through just some examples here of these rates on a per trip basis for the specific segments that we have on US 69. But a lot of times we're asked, you know, how would US 69 compare against other express lanes around the country? And to make that comparison, you need to think about these trips on more of a per mile basis, or what does it cost me to go 1 mile in the express lane? So for US 69, these rates during those peak periods, these rates equate to about 29 to 32 cents per mile if you look at it depending on the direction. So to illustrate how that compares against other express lanes in the United States, that 29 to 32 cent per mile is what's shown there in light blue with the US 69 Kansas there on this exhibit. So if you look at this, shows a variety of operating express lanes across the country. But if you look at that green line, that green bar represents the national average of, we would say, express lanes that are similar to this, that are operated by public entities like a DOT. So we're showing that US 69 would be below the national average. And to me, this is not surprising. We should be below the national average. You know, Overland Park isn't LA or Miami or Houston, where the congestion is significantly worse. And in those locations, the pricing has to be set higher to ensure that ensure the reliability that they're looking for. On US 69, we can achieve that same goal with lower rates. I'll flip to the next slide. So we kind of looking at this at just maybe a little different way. These maps and the table that we have on this slide show a couple of example trips and how those costs could vary, whether you're using it during the peak periods of the day, the morning, afternoon rush hours versus off-peak times. So looking at the example of someone who, say, gets on at 151st Street and drives north all the way through the corridor, that's what's shown in orange. If they drive that during the peak period, again, that would be about a $1.50 trip. That same trip, though, on a weekend or some other time that's not as busy, you know, that's a 65-cent trip for just because the traffic is lower in those times of day. If you look at the other direction, one of the more frequent trips that we see is people coming from the north and are exiting at 135th Street. Maybe they're coming from downtown. You know, during that afternoon rush hour, that trip would cost $1. But when it's not the peak period, say maybe they're going to the, you know, to Shields Soccer Park for a soccer game or whatever it is, that same trip would be 35 cents. So just another way to visualize kind of what those anticipated costs are for a couple of example trips. Flip to the next slide. So I would say most people don't really think about their budget in terms of a cost for a trip, though. They think about their personal finances and either, you know, what's my cost by week or by month or annually. So what we've done is thought through some examples of how could different users choose to use the corridor differently, and what are the costs that they might see as a result of that. So there will be some people will choose to use the express lanes frequently. You know, this might be a commuter that chooses to use the express lanes 5 times per week. They're driving during those peak periods. You know, used in this way, that would come with a weekly cost of about $7.50 or a monthly cost of about $30. But a lot of people won't use them that often. They may be more of an occasional user, and they could use the express lanes really, you know, more on the once per week, maybe during the peak, but not necessarily taking the full trip. So if they chose to use the express lanes in that way, the cost to those users drop to about $1 a week or maybe $50 a year if you look at it on an annual basis. Lastly, and I think it's important to point this out, that the usage of the express lanes is obviously a choice. And some will choose not to use the express lane. They'll choose never to use the express lane. And if that's what they choose to do, this comes with no additional cost. And they still benefit because of the reduced congestion in the corridor. There will be some people that choose to use the express lane and free up some of the capacity in those general purpose lanes. So they still benefit even though they are not electing to use the express lane. So clearly there's a lot of scenarios in between these that we've shown. We've just tried to pick some examples. The way that it's used is really up to the users and what's important to them. But hopefully this helps frame what some of these costs could be. So we've kind of come at this a few different ways. I really want to open up for some questions here and get some feedback on where we're seeing these rates.
And Cameron, we do have a couple questions in the chat. Yeah. One from Adam. It says, it would seem that there would be a few weeks that people would pay during the midday when traffic flows smoothly. Do the financial plans anticipate minimal revenue during the day?
Yes. There's obviously going to be, when there's less traffic, there's less incentive for people to use the express lane. So the thing that I'll say is it isn't zero. Typically there are still some folks that choose to use it even during the off-peak times. But yes, the projections account for much lower usage during the non-peak periods. Does that answer your question, Adam?
Yes, thank you.
And Julie had one, are the costs set in each direction, no matter when I enter the express lane, or prorated by the length of section I use?
So they are set based on the length that you use. So if you're only using one segment, you would only pay for that partial trip cost. If you're going the full length, then obviously the cost is larger because you're going a longer length. On the direction, the pricing is set independently based on the direction of travel. So if there's heavier congestion in one direction versus another, the pricing will be more to say go northbound in the AM than southbound in the AM. Is that what you were asking, Julie?
Yeah, your example was just showing, I understood that the directional cost is based on frequency of, one north and south is not the same usership, I guess is one way to say it. I got that. I just wasn't sure how you do the proration if I enter at one section and exit at another section and not use the full length.
Yeah, it's based on just the length of your trip that you take in the lane.
Which I think is another, the point you made earlier about merging into and out of just in those sections, in the merge sections. That's where you're capturing how many people are under that reader for that next segment. So you want to use those sections to enter and exit for that reason. And then I saw Ron's question about what differential costs would you anticipate for trucks and buses? One of the things that we haven't done a lot of outreach on and want to see if we're moving forward with this option. I think we would have more conversations with those users. And we may have some data on trucks. I wanted to address the bus piece of that. The legislation requires that KDOT charge a toll to every user, but it does not say that it has to be the same. So to incentivize transit, I think from a KDOT perspective, we would probably charge a pretty minimal fee to encourage more people to use transit for that trip reliability, because they would have access to the express toll lane at a lower cost. Cameron, do we have any data on the truck aspect of this equation?
We have. I might ask Scott to weigh in on that because I don't know that off the top of my head. But generally speaking, the truck rates will be higher, just similarly to what they are on most toll facilities, including the Kansas Turnpike, where those costs are higher for trucks. Scott, I don't know if you have a sense of the differential that we were suggesting for trucks.
Yeah, Cameron, thanks. And what's typically done and what we would suggest here is using an industry standard formula referred to in the toll industry of N-1, where N is the number of axles of the vehicle. So when you think of a 2-axle vehicle, the N being the 2 minus 1 is 1. That's times the base toll rate that you saw on the signs that you mentioned there in the chat that Cameron showed earlier. So an 18-wheeler, for example, a 5-axle truck, that would be 5 minus 1 is 4 times the passenger car rate. So it would be a 4 times the rate you saw on the sign. And that's a very common way to account for the additional axles, the wear and tear on the facility for the heavier vehicles. But a 2-axle vehicle, whether it's a box truck or a bus, would be the same as a passenger car.
So I think that might actually get at Leroy's question there too about differential rates for other vehicles. But yeah, the higher rates would apply to non-passenger vehicles.
And Adam noted that our example of 5 days a week, if they used it both ways, wouldn't our example be twice as much?
So if they that was based on 5 trips per week, not 5 round trips per week. So yeah.
And also, I wanted to go back to the flyover question that John had. He was he had a follow-on question regarding the noise and the traffic noise and air pollution. Would we project there being more noise or air pollution with the flyover in the northwest portion of the connector? So we didn't quite address that.
So there would be some additional vehicles on that flyover, which would be at a higher elevation. So I think there would be the potential for some additional noise in that corridor, but in that particular area, we would have to see though whether that's appreciably more than the noise that already comes from the existing ramp that comes southbound at that same elevation. So it would be additional vehicles, maybe a little unclear as to whether that actually means additional noise. And from an air quality perspective, you know, that movement being a 2-lane flyover that's going to be moving at a much better speed is going to be considerably better than the low speed loop ramp that serves that movement. And so from an air quality perspective, you're getting those vehicles moving at better speed, should see some improvement in air quality as a result.
Thanks, Cameron. John, if you have any follow-up questions on that, feel free to let us know.
Any other questions? Robin, you want to, let's do
All right, let's go on to this Minty to get some reactions as well. So just type in the code based on the example toll rates. What best describes your reaction to the anticipated pricing? A, the rates seem reasonable for US 69. B, the rate seems too high for this community. C, the rate seemed too low to manage congestion. And I guess E, I guess we don't have a D. Other. So our alphabet work isn't good this week. But that's okay. All right, we got some responses there, so we could go on to the next question, I think. Given the toll rates, I could see myself as a frequent user, B, an occasional user, or C, a never user. Great.
Very good.
And the next question. Given the toll rates, I could see A, some value in using the express lanes, B, high value in using the express lanes, C, no value in the express lanes, and D, I'm undecided.
I think that's.
So any questions or comments on any of these questions or comments, any additional discussion or questions you all want to pose to Cameron or Lindsay?
All right. Well, thank you guys very much for your input on all this. Lindsay, you want to kind of take us through where we're headed here?
Absolutely. So this month, given the 2 advisory group meetings that were pretty close together, and all of the work that we're sort of getting delivered to us, right? So we had a lot of data on the toll rates. We're having briefings with council members. We're going to have an additional public meeting this month, as well as opening up an additional online public survey. So more information will be coming out via social media, and encourage your organizations to participate in that survey and the public meeting. But we've got a lot of stuff coming up. And again, we're really pushing hard to work towards that end of May, June timeframe for a decision on which preference the advisory group and then ultimately the city will have on whether we want to pursue an express tolling option or added capacity without a toll. And so lots to come, and appreciate all of your time. I know having 2 meetings so close together has been a lot, and trust us as the team would agree that I think that this has been a lot, and a lot of information coming at you quickly. So as you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Cameron or me or the team. Generally, if you're wanting additional information or have additional questions now that you've had time to review. But we have plenty of time here left. Discuss any components of what we've talked about today or previously. The environmental review is kind of coming to a close here, and so we have lots of information that you've gotten over the last 2 meetings that we'd be happy to discuss. I did see we had a chat comment that John wanted to have data or calculations at this or the next meeting on noise level projections and air quality impacts for 6 and 3.
Okay. We can work through some of that. Nice. So Clint's question
perfect.
about cuts on the hills along 69 that would warrant walls versus laying back the soil, in particular near the picture that we're showing. Yeah, so there'll definitely be some areas where we've got to do some some exterior grading as we expand the highway to 6 lanes. We try and keep that within the right of way and all the locations where that's a reasonable thing to do. There probably would be in that particular spot some excavation that would cut some of that hill back. But whether or not it requires walls or not, we have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, but I'm sure there will be some. And Reverend Hamilton, we might try and connect with you a little bit later about your offer with the survey link. I think that would be a great idea.
Well, since we have,
no,
go ahead, Cameron.
Oh,
We're
I'm
both
fine.
uncomfortable with the silence for the same amount of time. We both started talking at exactly the same time. One thing that I keep pitching, and we are happy to reach out to different organizations or groups or clubs or things like that, where there might be an audience that would want to be educated on where we are with the project and what information we have gotten to date. I think, we've been proactively reaching out and we're having some success, but if anybody has any ideas, please send those along. We'd be happy to provide a community presentation. So I always like to make that pitch, just trying to get the word out and get more information in people's hands.
I guess I'd ask a question back to the group, since we have an hour and we can choose to use as much of it as we would like. As you guys think through these concepts and the differences between the two, what other information in your minds is necessary to kind of fully form that choice in your mind as to whether you feel like this is, a viable option or the preferred option here? What other information do you feel like it helps you make that decision for yourself?
Cameron, just because I'm lazy and my fingers are tired from typing today.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm going to state my question instead of type it. I see the opportunity of the express lane if we can somehow connect it back to public transit solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And that express lane with a public transit solution on the express lane being a incentive for more folks to choose a public transit option, but there's a lot of things that have to be in place. I mean, you have to have routes and systems and frequency that gets me to where I need to be when I need to be there. And certainly the express lane could be a little bit of that when I need to be there incentive for quicker movement. And then also, if we can tie this back to any of the community for all ages work, the number of our jurisdictions who are starting to look at folks, their environmental footprint and how this comes alongside and maybe addresses some of that. But I don't know how it can address that if we're not really closely tying this opportunity in with public transit solutions.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great suggestion. Lindsay, do you want to?
This is Adam. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I raised a question in the chat the last meeting that we had, and I think one of the pieces that will be important, I'm sure you guys already have this figured out, and I think you said you were nearing the end of the study of this, but you put in the category of environmental justice the fairness or equity for lower income people who are, I think just being able to make that case to people, hey, this is how this is, positioning this, we're doing this as opposed to taxing the entire community. And this is partly how we find, justice for lower income people here is that the user is actually going to pay for it. Other things like that. Because I think there's, rightly, we have a tendency to look and go, is that really fair for the single mom who is also in a hurry to get to the airport or get to wherever she, get to work or whatever, that she can't afford to pay the $30 or $60 a month to drive in the fast lane each time. So I just think being aware of that and being able to answer that up front is really important.
Yeah, I want to comment on that just a little bit. I think as it relates to environmental justice, we have, it in the environmental review of the two options, if you'll recall, that was the only area that the express toll lanes didn't score as well as expanding capacity of just general purpose. And one of the nice things that we have here, and we have a community that is interested in sort of offsetting any of those impacts. I think the first thing and the way we can identify is really to reach out to those groups. And I know the team has already started that process reaching out to maybe lower income populations and minority populations to, inform them about the project, let them know what we're considering, take feedback. And also then we would have the time to look at tools to help offset some of those impacts. So first we've got to talk to them, we've got to figure out how this would negatively impact, and then how can we offset? And I think we're open to a lot of those options. And, the comment about, incentivizing transit, if we looked at some, express transit route that could utilize the express lane, looking at microtransit, we could incentivize microtransit on the corridor, all of those options to really enhance use of public transit, I think could benefit this corridor, both with the express lane in particular, because unless we're managing a lane, it's going to be the same user experience for everyone. And so we have a real opportunity to even enhance public transit further, depending on how we are managing their use of the express lane.
Yeah, I think just making the case, making a case that helps people, knowing that one of the things I love about the people in my congregation, and I think most of the people in the, I hope most of the people in the southern part of the county, is equity matters, and they want to make sure that that feels not like we're making first class and second class people in the, in the roads. And so this is how it's helping everybody, I think is really key. And I don't know that I would mention, I'm not sure, but I think when you say low income and minority populations, I think that assumes that minority populations are low income. And I don't think that really is the right, I wouldn't necessarily use that language on this. I just think you're talking about lower income people.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that is the criteria, like the formal criteria that is required under the federal regulation. So there is no specific, I will be sensitive to utilizing appropriate words on that in the future. But that correlation should not be made. That is just how these issues are measured under the federal requirements. So I apologize if there was a presentation. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
So Ron had asked about traffic simulations showing the weavings in those weave zones and those sorts of things. I mean, yes, we're building VisM models of those that will kind of analyze those weaves, make sure that they're adequately long. People can still make the exit that they want to get to, that sort of thing. In some cases, if those weave zones are, they start to have some performance issues, there's some measures you can take besides just adding length. You can consider, evaluating weave lanes and things like that to try and ease the transition between the express lanes. But yes, that's all part of what we'll be modeling.
In one of the meetings that we had with a council member, and I can't recall exactly who said it, but they made the comment that with the express toll lanes, you're placing a user fee on the users of that lane rather than providing, a more general tax source or a more general fee to the entirety of the community. And I think that is an interesting point, as well as we consider the equity question. One other thing that I know is of interest to this group is the percentage of traffic in the corridor. In our review, and as we were looking at rate setting and all of that, about just a little under 50% of the traffic either originates or terminates in Overland Park. So we have a lot of through traffic that is not Overland Park residents. And I think that is an interesting thing to consider when we're talking about users of the facility and user fees as a way of paying for additional congestion. It's an interesting thing to consider and might be of interest to folks in the group as well. All right, any additional questions? Cameron, did I mischaracterize any of that, or you have?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, folks on the call and in the meeting, we really appreciate your time. And I think we have our next step slide. And Robin, I don't know if you're covering that or I guess maybe I'll just say thank you and encourage everybody, you know, our next public meeting, the live portion of that is going to be on April 20th. We will have it open for the virtual participation for a couple of weeks. And just encourage all of you to continue to stay engaged, and we will provide additional information as it comes in. Anything I missed?
I
No.
don't think so.
No. I think
And
our
we're-
next meeting's on May 4th. So we'll be sending out some information on that before then, but so we'll be talking to you again.
Thank you all very much. As always, we really appreciate all the input from you guys and your questions and thoughts and everything. It's really valuable to our team. So we appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks all.